Thank you very much, Sam, for a very thorough analysis of a pretty complex problem. And from my point of view, what I would like to do now is to present to you what we hear and what we sense about this very, very hot, burning, I should say, potato of the future of emergency surgery by talking to surgical societies and professional surgical bodies across Europe. The first thing to say is that this European session could not take place in a more European venue. Actually, this place, when it opened up 32 years ago, it hosted the ultimate European event, the Eurovision Song Contest. You will not be very happy to know that the Germans won the competition, and there is nothing more painful than a German victory on English soil. But this is life, unfortunately. On a more serious note, first of all, to talk a little bit about the UEMS, just a couple of things, the European Union of Medical Specialists. To put it in a very simple way, the UEMS is the BMA of the European Union. And it constitutes of the national professional organizations across Europe. It is 56 years younger. It represents 34 countries in the European Union and beyond, much beyond, and an overall 1.7 million healthcare professionals across Europe. Is divided into 41 sections of specialties, medical specialties, and has also 15 multidisciplinary joint committees. Its budget is pretty modest, just 2 million euros per year. So it doesn't have to be that the European project has to be particularly expensive, regardless of how big it is. And it's a very democratic and open society managed by a council and executive elected by the national delegates of the professional organizations. Its main aims is to promote the interests of medical specialists in Europe, promote high standards of care, training and practice, continuous medical education and professional development, the IACME being one of the flagship projects of the UEMS, and also promote quality assurance in specialist practice. One of the 41 sections is the UEMS section of surgery, and this is, the summary, the sum of the national surgical associations across Europe, the United Kingdom being represented by the Association of Surgeons of Great Britain and Ireland. The offices are in Berlin, and this particular issue about the section of general surgery is that we have 9 divisions for surgical subspecialties, which matches pretty more the structure of the ASGBI, and some of them have even more divisions and educational boards, and we are part in 5 multidisciplinary joint committees. This debate about the future of emergency surgery in Europe is an ASGBI-generated debate. So the Council said that this is a big problem for us. We need to see what is happening across Europe, and we need to try to come to some sort of a consensus for a common strategy in the future. And since this was put on the table by the SGBI about 2 years ago, I can tell you there is a tsunami of symposia, sessions, discussions, debates about this issue, and the outcome is extremely, extremely interesting. But before we talk about any potential solutions at the pan-European level, it would be extremely useful to see a little bit of the European background and information related to it. When it comes to generalism versus specialism, the issue that my colleague, Professor Tesi, tackled, in Europe we are still more towards the area of generalism. Our American colleagues have 158 specialties and subspecialties, and they generate a new one almost every day. Our Canadian colleagues have 67, and the EU we have 55 mutually recognized specialties and subspecialties. And when you go to individual countries, they are not far from this number. There is a very important piece of legislation that came up late last year, the European Directive on Healthcare and Cross-Border Healthcare, which is probably the most important European healthcare legislation for a generation. It clarifies the rules on access to healthcare in other EU countries, including reimbursement. And what is extremely important is that it put a lot of emphasis on quality of outcomes, transparency, and accountability of healthcare professionals and healthcare organizations across Europe. Also, it puts at the very center of the legislation the rights of the patients. And the patients have the right, not just the wish, to have guarantees about the quality and the security of the services offered to them. They need to have the information to be able to make informed choices about their healthcare, and also to have a very clear idea about the financial framework of the provision of this healthcare. So no matter what we are going to discuss about the future of emergency surgery, has to have, at the heart of it this kind of legislation, where outcomes have to be outstanding, where patients have to be offered, guarantees, when patients can make informed choices. 50% mortality in laparotomies would not be acceptable anymore. Second big issue in Europe is the aging population. And when you see here the total world fertility rates, and this represents births per woman and across the world, when it's faintest, it is the lowest rate, and as you see in Europe, we are at the bottom of the class. When it comes to life expectancy, you can see the projection there. By 2200, we'll be living anything between 100 and 120 years. So people live longer thanks to all the advances in modern medicine. Persistently low mortality rates lead to an aging society in Europe. 50% of the population growth in the EU between now, 2005 and 2050, will derive from increased longevity of the population. Changes by the year 2050, based on the Eurostat data, the population between 15 and 64 years old will go down by 48 million, and the population over 65 years old will increase by 58 million. It will become a society of seniors. And this is not only reflected in the issues that we have discussed again and again and again about emergency general surgery and these elderly people needing a colectomy or have a perforated DU. It reflects in many other areas of our practice, including, for example, my own area and Derek's area of work in transplantation. The average organ donor, many, many years ago, when I was being trained as a registrar, was looking something like this. A few years ago, the average donor looked a little bit like this. And now that I'm training my own trainees, the average donor look a little bit like that. And you can imagine the effect of it in the overall provision of transplant services in the UK and across Europe. The population growth across the world, again, this is a very clear example. Well, blue, there is a decrease in the overall population, and purple is the maximum increase. The so-called third world countries, the poorest countries, have the highest increase in population. Combine this with this, which is the world food shortages across the world, and we all know where those are. And combine this with the excellent, impeccable record of Europe when it comes to not only protecting, but also celebrating human rights, and you can see where the migration is going around the world, now and in the future. The director of travel from around the world comes predominantly to this continent, which makes the problems that we've just discussed even bigger. Working restrictions. How many times we have discussed about the European working time directives? This is Norway. This is a European country, but not an EU country, outside the European working time directives. And look at the way the trainees are being trained. We had the one extreme when I was trained in the States, when John Nigerian used to tell us, you are lucky today, guys, you will have 2 minutes for lunch, to this dolce vita, basically, this wonderful life of being on, off before, off after, emergency surgery, being offered all sorts of, conveniences and support. The only thing they don't offer them is a visit to the local spa every time they are on call. But the bottom line is, look at what the bottom line is. Look when Norwegians get finally specialized in the various specialties. To become a breast surgeon in Norway, you will become finally 52 years old. So if I were in Norway, I'm a consultant now in the UK for 14 years, I will need another 3 to 4 years to even specialize as, a breast surgeon. The European Commission data also shows that by 2010, we will be down by 1 million healthcare professionals needed to provide services. There will be a 10 to 35% increase in diabetes, carcinoma of the colon, heart attacks, osteoarthritis, the diseases that come with the aging population, and the incidence of Alzheimer's and dementia will almost double, and some of us will be on this boat. And this will create unimaginable budget deficits. The European expenditure for healthcare will grow by 2050 by 350% with the current trend. But the economy will expand only by 180%. Just Germany, the healthiest and strongest economy in Europe, will have a 2 trillion euros deficit. And if the Germans will not be able to afford it, most likely nobody will be able to afford it. It will be a massive, massive issue. So what is the way forward? And you have to be brave to say that the way forward doesn't coincide necessarily with the direction that we are happen to go as things stand. And what I'm going to present you in the next 3 or 4 minutes or so is not a ready solution on a plate or a directive coming from Brussels, anything but that. This is exactly what we hear and sense when we talk to people across Europe about the issue of emergency surgery. There is consensus that emergency surgery and emergency surgery training should stay and should be a paramount element of the core curriculum of general surgical training. No debate about that. There is also consensus that emergency surgery and the provision of it should be part of job plans of surgeons, regardless of their level of specialism, especially in the early stages of their career. And also that people who provide specialist services should be able to look after the emergency elements of their practice. So I cannot say I'm a very specialized kidney transplant surgeon, but when the ureter leaks on a Saturday night, I'm very sorry, I'm a specialist. Somebody else has to deal with that in the middle of the night. I should be able to deal with my own emergencies. But also the sense for a need, and this is a sense for a need, it's not a directive, I'm repeating that, for the creation of a specialty or a competency related to emergency surgery is coming up as well. And the way this is seen is not a specialty which is going to be a quick fix for the problems that we are facing, a second-class specialty just to get us off the hook with the current problems, but a proper specialty with curriculum, pre, peri, and post-ECT training, and equal opportunities with any other specialty for research, education, overall professional development, and recognition. Also, and this is paramount, people believe that we should not only be talking about emergency general surgeons as individuals or as groups, but proper emergency services in a healthcare environment as a package that will make it appealing. And this will come with sound organization, leadership, and governance, and it will be integrated with all the other hospital services. There is a fantastic study from the University of Ontario in Canada where they were facing exactly the problems we were discussing. Their emergency services were absolutely a mess, and people were waiting even for days to be able to get their definitive operation following a general surgical emergency problem. So they established this package of emergency surgeries and of emergency surgery, not just surgeons, but the whole service. And this had some spectacular results. There was a dramatic shift, 132%, of doing these operations in the middle of the night during daytime. And I don't need to tell you what advantages this has, clinically, operation, quality of life-wise, and so forth. And this also reduced dramatically the cost of the provision of those services as well. So when it's being done properly and as a service, has clearly very positive effects. Also, we need proper business and workforce planning. And this came hot off the press, was one of the top 5 priorities for the future of training across the world. And business planning and workforce planning, they should not be dirty words, because in the NHS environment, sometimes they are perceived as such. Even Bernard Shaw said, make up your mind how many doctors a community needs to keep it well. Do not register more or less than this number. And nobody can accuse Bernard Shaw for being a capitalist or a free marketeer, anything but that. But he had common sense. So the model proposed and the model sensed from the proposals across Europe is to go away from this madness of either cutting or spending. In good times, in the health services, we spend like drunken sailors. In bad times, we cut like maniacs. Both of them are entirely stupid. The truth and the way forward is in the middle, where you study, you plan, and you invest in the service, waiting for a specific outcome. There is a fantastic paper, and I think Ian mentioned it also in his talk, about the cost of emergency laparotomy in England, done by a team in East Sussex. And basically what they estimated, they did some amazing work, extremely detailed scientific work, to calculate all the reference costs related to the provision of emergency surgery in their hospital, their area, and then this was broadened in the whole of the United Kingdom. Means that the emergency surgery services, when it comes to emergency laparotomy in the United Kingdom, are underfunded per year by approximately £300 million. This is not worrying, this is scaring. This is absolutely scaring. And of course, the next thing would be for this to be factored and stratified for all the healthcare reference groups. So when you have this information, The people who have the power and the people who have the hands on their money, next time they will make decisions, they will think extremely carefully. And yes, they need to spend in Da Vinci robots to take the prostate out in a very fancy way. And you do need this kind of stuff because you do need the Ferraris and the McLarens to be able to have safe family cars in the streets. But you also need to think that here in Harrogate, a mile from here, in this DGH, there is a great need for provision of emergency general surgery where it's actually needed and is grossly underfunded. There are some fantastic initiatives coming up in Europe that you should take advantage of it. The European Commission promotes the initiative of European reference networks that will support exactly collaboration about issues of pan-European significance like that. We develop European fellowships that can provide the opportunity for training in our trainees, not only in one country, but in many countries until finally they can practice around Europe. The issue of mentorship, which is coming again and again as a great need for training of any kind, especially stressful training in the context of emergency surgery, and also the support and our responsibility to support and train surgeons in developing countries, to help people there so they have one more less need to come over here. And if these doctors come over here, they will be prepared to join us and help with the local population. How this is going to be done? A European project, and I have said that again and again and again, is a recipe for disaster when it comes from the top down. When you say to people, you know something, what Ian Anderson and the ASGBI have achieved over the last few years when it comes to emergency surgery is nothing. Throw it out of the window and replace it with this that comes directly from Brussels. This is not only outrageously insulting, it's also outrageously stupid, because you are losing this massive experience and expertise that exists across Europe. A European project is a success when you hear, you learn, you cherish, you admire, you respect the experience and expertise that exists across the continent, and you build on that, and you try to reach consensus about common, very high standards. It will be painful, it will be difficult, it will take us a while, but we will get it right. And when we will do, as it's always in Europe, it will be an absolute masterpiece. And I would like to thank my esteemed colleagues, Peter Bruch, Tom Saka, and Arthur Felice for their precious contribution of data, and all of you for your kind attention. Thank you.